Her true story. From Wisconsin. I paid for their down payment. Then they told me no visitors for a year. So I became the landlord instead. They locked me out, but I owned the locks. Ever been kicked out of the very place you helped build? Leave a 13 so we know we're not alone. Don't forget, she snapped, her voice sharp as ice crackling across still water. We are the homeowners here, not you. You need to go live somewhere else. My daughter-in-law's tone held no warmth, only cold authority. She said it as if she had rehearsed these words to perfection. My son stood behind her, face turned down, silent, his body leaning into the kitchen counter, as if he needed its support to stand up to his own mother's humiliation. Every word shoved into my heart like a ramming beam. It took me a moment to steady my breathing. I clutched the envelope in my hands. The stack of papers containing proof of the down payment I had made. The copies of bank transfers I had authorized. The folder labeled Deposit for Mortgage with my name on it. My hands were shaking. I had left my small home in Wisconsin for this moment. This family's milestone. I had believed in them. I had believed in us. Now I stood in a house I helped build, with two people telling me I no longer belonged. They treated me not as family, but as a burden. I looked at my son, his gaze averted, lips pressed tight in helpless resignation. I looked at the woman I raised, who now held the power to erase me with a few careless words, and I felt the sting not just of rejection, but of betrayal. She laughed then, a cold, triumphant laugh that echoed in the high-ceilinged living room. Don't worry, she said. You'll have plenty of places to go, plenty of room in the next year. You're no longer welcome here. She gestured toward the front door, as though framing an exit stage left. Get your things. Mother, pack it up. We'll call the movers tomorrow. My heart pounded so loud I thought it would stop me from breathing. Yet I stood still, unmoving. I did not cry. I did not plead. I did not speak. I knew enough to know that no argument would change their minds. No tears would soften their cold resolve. I reached into the folder and withdrew the contract with my signature. My money. My effort. My participation. I had believed I was investing in their future. Instead, I was being discarded. My palms grew damp. I closed the folder and held it like a shield. My head bowed slightly. If anyone saw, I was unmoved. Inside, I felt white-hot rage and deep sorrow, anger at being used, grief for the home that had become a cage. My son cleared his throat, finally stepping forward, his voice small. Mom, maybe we should talk about this later, she cut him off, her hand curling into a fist at her side. No, Jacob, there is nothing more to discuss. I've made arrangements. You should support me. She paused. If you care about this house, then you'll back me. He didn't say anything. He nodded, defeated. I saw the battle between love and obedience flicker in his eyes, a war he had lost before it began. A terrible silence followed. Then I exhaled, as if forced air had been trapped in my lungs. I moved. I turned toward the stairs that led to the bedrooms I helped select carpet for, the hallways I painted with my daughter-in-law, the windows I helped measure so that curtains could frame family dinners. I walked slowly, each step measured, toward the front door. My suitcase lay at the foot of the stairs, soft, worn, a relic of simpler days. As I rounded the corner, I saw my granddaughter's bunk bed through the archway. She was asleep. I swallowed the ache in my chest. This wasn't her fault. She had no say in this. Someday she would understand, but it couldn't stop this. I paused at the doorway. My hand hovered over the knob. The summer breeze drifted inside. I felt the scent of jasmine from the garden, the flower bush I planted on her first birthday, hoping it would bloom year after year. I reached out and brushed a fingertip along the soft petals peeking through the window. Then I turned. I closed the door behind me. I did not slam it. I simply closed it. The click of the latch felt final. It was not a defeat. It was a farewell. Outside, the sun had begun to lower, spilling gold over the driveway. My suitcase stood beside me, quiet, faithful. Everything I had brought to this milestone moment fit inside. Everything else belonged to them now. I hoisted the suitcase, its weight a reminder of all I had carried in my life. I walked down the steps. My head stayed high, though tears burned my eyelids. I would not let them see me cry. I would not give them the luxury of my brokenness. At the bottom of the stairs, I paused. I looked back at the house. Every board, every brick held a memory. And even though they claimed it, the foundation still bore my fingerprints. I stood in the gravel, thinking of all the love I'd poured into this house, the birthday parties I helped host, the meals I prepared, the holidays I lit with laughter, the dreams I had spun into the corners of each room. No, they might claim the home's ownership now, but the memory of me remained carved into every corner. I turned and walked toward my car, parked at the curb. By the time I reached the driver's seat, dusk had wrapped around the neighborhood. The world seemed colder, emptier, but not to me. Not anymore. As I settled behind the wheel, I closed my eyes for a moment. I thought of what comes next, what I would do, where I would go. I thought of who I was beyond this moment, a woman who made sacrifices. Before we start, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Try to watch the videos as long as possible by watching more often. YouTube will promote these stories to a larger audience, grow your channel, and bring you more interesting things. Let's start now. Who invested? Not for profit, but out of love. A woman who would not watch without response. A woman who knew she had rights, even if ignored. I started the engine. The rumble beneath me felt reassuring. I did not yet know what awaited me. I did not know where my path led, but I wanted more than this. More than forced exits. More than... And so I drove away. Behind me, the lights of that house shone in the gathering dusk. Ahead of me, the road stretched into night. I did not belong behind that door anymore. But I belonged somewhere else. Somewhere I would build new doors. Better ones. Where I was needed, wanted, respected. Where I would own the locks and the right to use them. I remember the day my dear Harold passed away, his hands still smelling of cotton and thread. He was a tailor by trade, a gentleman who loved the hum of his sewing machine more than anything. When he succumbed to cancer, I inherited not just his grief, but also his thrift. He used to say, "Every stitch is a stitch toward tomorrow." I kept that philosophy alive as I counted nickels and dimes for the future. For 10 years after he passed, I pieced together every paycheck from odd sewing jobs. I hand-stitched baby clothes, repaired church banners, darned socks for neighbors. I kept a ledger. Since kindergarten, I'd loved order, so I could track how much I had saved. I charted in the back of Harold's ledger book. Every dollar marked a moment closer to something new. When Jacob and Camilla told me they were ready to buy land and build a house, my heart leapt. A house of their own. Not renting, not starting over every year. I had been saving, and I offered them my entire down payment. I insist, I told them sternly, waving the ledger printout. This is for family. To build a foundation. Camilla hesitated, clutching her purse. Mom, we can manage. But I interrupted. You will take it, and it will be called the Hamilton Family Home. They said thank you. I nodded and passed the check across the kitchen table. The paper felt heavy in my hand. It was the first time in years I felt I was truly investing in tomorrow. We signed the loan documents together. I was listed on the deposit line. My name glowed on the page, contributor. The bank clerk handed me copies of the contract and shook my hand. You'll get to pick curtains. Camilla joked. I laughed like a child. Fast forward 6 months, and it was ceremony day, the Thursday before Easter, when winter still clung to the wind. My sons always teased that I loved every holiday. Maybe I did. The contractor handed me the brass key, the first key, to their home. They had phrased it as a gift. It was mine and theirs, and hard-won. I pressed the cold key into my fingers. The smell of pine and varnish filled my nose as the door creaked open. My heart thumped like it used to during church on Sundays. I stepped across the threshold, and everything felt alive. The floors gleamed like sunlight on water. I knelt and ran my hand along the grain. The walls were freshly painted, the color a soft sage that reminded me of rolling hills at dawn. The fireplace had a mantle, ready for photographs I hadn't even taken yet. Camilla gave me a warm smile that day. Thank you for making this possible, she whispered. I nodded and hugged her softly. Feeling warmth spread through me. We walked through each room together. The kitchen, so bright with space for holiday dinners. The dining area, where I imagined placing a long wooden table for Thanksgiving. The bedrooms, they had already decided on my favorite corner room overlooking the garden. Outside, we planted a rose bush and a sapling maple. I pressed the shovel, making the first hole with my hands. Camilla helped pot the rose, telling me how she'd name it, Love and Legacy. I stood back with my grandson in my arms. Lily was 10 months old, cooing and reaching for the leaves. I brushed her soft hair and whispered, "This house is built for you." I could almost hear the future laughter. I envisioned Christmas mornings with stockings, Easter egg hunts in the yard, birthdays with balloon arches and cake frosting on everyone's faces. Every brick, every tile, every paint stroke had been paid for in part by me. It was the culmination of hardship and thrift, of early mornings and late nights. I had earned it. My contribution was real, and I had earned the right to stand here. Later that evening, as we toasted lemonade on the porch, Camilla looked out at the horizon and said, "This is home." I felt each word settle in me like a blessing. But blessings sometimes have an expiration date, and soon enough, something changed. That night, I stayed late. I cuddled Lily until she yawned, telling her about Grandma and Grandpa's tiny rental apartment years ago. I told her how I did chores so she would have a bedroom like this one. I kissed her head, turned off the lights, and quietly walked out the back door, closing it gently behind me. The house felt too quiet, too new, too untouched. My footsteps didn't echo. My laughter felt foreign. I wanted to stay. I could have stayed in the guest room. No one asked me not to, but I left. Something inside me told me change was near. The next morning, I showed up for breakfast. The smell of bacon and eggs warmed me, but there was no invitation. Camilla didn't offer me a plate. Jacob barely looked up, chewing without saying a word. That afternoon, I settled in the guest room with needlework and a cutting board, making a salad for dinner. I heard voices downstairs, not planning around me, just making plans. The plans of people who use the word space a lot, our space. They called it. I felt my hands go cold. The house still made me ache with love. It held ghosts of my dreams and the knowledge I had built it with my own legs, but I also felt a presence I hadn't felt before, a barrier between me and the house I made. I would not see it, not yet. I would wait, and I would remember, because this house was supposed to be our home, but I sensed it was becoming theirs. I never expected a thank you to turn into a locked gate. It began quietly, like a breeze unnoticed, until it rattles a window. 3 months passed since the first key ceremony. I came by weekly, believing I was simply a part of this family's rhythm. Through the front window, I watched Lily chase her soccer ball on the lawn and heard Camilla coaching her from the patio. Those were moments I once thought would include me. Afternoons full of laughter, where I'd stay to help unpack groceries or set the table. Instead, one Saturday afternoon, Camilla met me at the door. She held her phone like a shield. "Mom," she said, her voice polite but final. "We're going to close video access now. You'll no longer get alerts for the cameras. We're focusing on our family time." I nodded politely. I knew what that meant. I smiled through the ache. A few days later, I learned where my visits were slipping. The contractor had reprogrammed the smart lock. My code, once active, no longer worked. Every time I tried to enter, the keypad blinked red. I walked to the porch door one evening, just before dinner. I knocked lightly. Knock, knock. The sound echoed through the hallway like a question no one answered. Lily's laughter drifted over dinner plates, and I felt the ache of being stopped at the threshold of what I helped build. I did not leave. I waited. 2 nights later, I wrapped myself in my shawl and sat on the porch steps. Wisconsin nights chilled early now, the air sharp with November whisper. Leaves cracked underfoot, the sky dimmed to ink. Camilla closed the blinds. No lights came on inside. The only warmth was across the glass, in the living room, where they were gathered. I watched Lily bury her head in her mother's lap. Jacob's voice, low and soothing. I imagined the smell of their dinner, pot roast, mashed potatoes, and felt a pinch. But I stayed on those cold steps, and the porch became a stage for grief. The kind no one rehearsed for. I had thought family would embrace me. Instead, my loving presence had become a disruption. Even that gentle identity, Grandma, was slowly erased. That night, I didn't sleep. I leaned against the cold wood of the porch, hugging my knees. Tears I once bottled up spilled out. The home I helped build had put me on the outside looking in, and I realized this was not about space or privacy. It was about control. But I stayed silent. Months passed. Visits dwindled further. Once, I knocked before breakfast and saw the stroller at the entrance, but the door remained shut. I stood beneath the porch light, the red keypad blinking at me, and wondered, who had the audacity to erase me so completely when they locked me out for a full night after Thanksgiving? When Lily slept instead on her father's work trip, I noticed the sleigh bell, Wisp, I'd hung on the doorknob at Christmas time. It lay on the porch floor, broken. That night, I cried beneath the stars. But in grief, I discovered resolve. This wasn't a story about departing. It was about reclaiming the narrative that had been hijacked. It was about knowing my place wasn't up for debate. I did not storm in the next day. I wrapped myself in my dignity and kept all papers safe. I walked home, the porch behind me like an empty page. I would not knock again, not until the world heard the measures I might take. Because sometimes, being kind in silence lays the groundwork for speaking loudly through action. I sleep better now than I did on that porch, because I know I am not powerless. But they are safe behind those locked doors, wondering why their smart home still feels haunted by absence. The wind came that night without warning. One moment, the sky had been a gentle dusk. The next, it had roared in, tearing across the plain and rattling the porch screen like angry hands. I heard it when I sat down on the top step. At dusk, clutching a thin wool blanket, the one I'd brought from home that morning, fresh from the dryer. I had decided to stay and watch the Christmas lights I had helped string, the ones appearing like frozen laughter around the eaves. But that laughter gave way to sharp notes of wind, and the glow flickered until darkness swallowed the bulbs. By the time the storm hit, I was halfway through my prayers, reciting them like a mantra to keep the fear in my chest from rising. I sat there, leaning against the cedar post I had once painted by hand. It sent a memory of summer evenings. I wrapped the blanket tighter beneath my arms. The fabric felt thin in the gusts that pulled at my clothes. But I stayed. The wind picked up speed. Rain began to beat the porch roof and spatter against my blanket. Water soaked the sides, and I felt it creep toward my feet. I moved lower, clutching the wool blanket around my knees. My breath came in soft bursts, but I did not shiver. Inside, it smelled of cinnamon and roasting turkey. Christmas music played softly on the stereo I once bought as a gift for Camilla. From the windows, I could see her blowing out decorations around the living room. She was busy. They were safe. I was the storm's only witness. I heard the door open, its soft click indicating someone inside, perhaps searching for me, perhaps shutting me out. It closed again. Silence. No step outside to check on me. No voice to call my name. The storm held the night like a silence, and I sat, a woman who had once been central to this family, left stranded in the dark. Around me, the wind shrieked with the power of decades of weather, a fierce reminder of all the storms I had weathered before, but none so cold as this one. I considered going home, to my little cottage that felt so foreign these days, but that would feel like admitting I'd lost. I stayed. Raindrops dripped off the porch, creating rivers along the boards. My blanket became wet, seeping salt air into my bones. That moment is seared in me. The contrast of warmth inside and freezing reality outside. It was a line from one life to another I had not asked to cross. I tried to sleep, sitting upright. My eyelids grew heavy, and I dreamed of family dinners, voices around tables, laughter that echoed. Then I awoke to a flash of lightning. In that stark white light, I saw my own face on the glass window, palpably set apart, both present and absent. I sat frozen, caught between the roar of the storm and the roar inside me, a fear that this was a turning point. The rain kept coming. Hours passed. I watched the sky change from black to blue and back. When dawn broke, it was a gray that poured across the sky like ashes. I was soaked. The blanket had puddled at my feet. My joints ached like old seams snapping. I stood, stepped inside to the doorway, and touched the glass. The kitchen lights were off, and the room had emptied overnight. No footsteps echoed. No warmth waited, not even a note left for me. I walked down the steps slowly, with every scraping footstep on the wet wood. I found the resolve I needed. I pulled the blanket tighter around me, braced against the wind, and walked away. I carried the ache of the cold within me. Not pain, exactly, but a feeling of being erased. I did not see her face. I didn't want to. I did not scream or stumble. I only walked. I felt the rain soak through my shoes, the chill bite deeper than winter. But I walked. When I reached my car, I turned to look back. The house stood there, framed by dull winter light, its windows blank. No flicker of awareness, no sign they realized I had almost frozen out there. Not even a whisper of regret. When I reached my home, I stopped on my porch, wetter than I had ever been, and I cried. Not sobbing, just tears that slipped out, pulled loose by the sharp bite of winter and betrayal. I pulled off my boots and made myself warm tea, holding the mug until it warmed my hands. That night, I lay in bed, the blankets thick around me. I let the grief course through me, along with a steady current of ice. But as dawn broke again, I felt the tremor of resolve. I would not come back until I figured out why I had to sleep outside to be forgotten. Their home had become an altar to my absence, and I had to respond, not with anger, but with something quieter and sharper than ice. I do not worry about storms anymore. I've been through the cold. After the coldest night I ever endured, I knew I had to do more than shiver. I needed answers. So, the next morning, I sat at my kitchen table, wrapped in a warm shawl, and pulled out the stack of loan documents I had saved. Those thick reams of paper I had barely glanced at since signing. I opened them where I had left off. Page 14, Section D, Line 3. There it was, in small but unmistakable print, co-owner of deposit, and beneath it, my name printed clearly. Co-owner? It was a moment of strange relief. Not joy, just understanding. I had more than emotion tied to this house. I had legal standing. My heart pounded. I read and reread the phrase as though I were discovering a family secret locked in plain view. I called my husband's old attorney, a kind man who had helped us through the grief of Harold's passing. He answered after 3 rings. Ruth Hamilton. I cleared my throat. I need your counsel. Frank, I'm listed in the loan documents as co-owner of the deposit.
What does that give me? He paused. It gives you rights. Ruth, not just rights. Influence. That's a non-trivial designation. It means you have enforceable interest in the asset, the house, because you brought the funds. I felt the weight of those words. Enforceable interest. The phrase echoed across the years of silent sacrifices I had made. It meant I belonged more than a visitor. I belonged in law. Can I do something with this? What should I do? Collect evidence, bank receipts, copies of the deposit check, anything. Then file an interest on the property. Better if you add yourself formally to the title. Or draw up agreement with the other two owners, your son and daughter-in-law, defining your rights. I thanked him, closing the call with a determined breath. I gathered my pen and paper, unraveling old receipts from my bag, the canceled check to the builder's escrow, the receipt stamped by the bank, a thank you letter from Camilla joking about curtains. I made photocopies and wrote notes in the margins. My living room looked like a lawyer's office by noon. I charted dates. November deposit. March closing. July lockout. I began drafting a timeline of hospitality turned hostility. I printed the bank ledger showing the withdrawal from my personal account. I copied the email threads where Camilla thanked me. I even noted the surveillance footage that recorded me standing by the door that November night, in case I needed evidence of attempt to re-enter. By the time darkness fell again, my table was stacked with files. My brain buzzed with clarity. I wasn't powerless. I had rightful claim. I had momentum. Late that night, I contacted another attorney, someone recommended by Frank who specialized in elder rights and property disputes. His assistant called later to schedule a meeting. As I crawled into bed, I realized I slept more soundly than I had in weeks. I wasn't chasing emotion. I was chasing rights. Rights you earn with sweat. With sacrifice. With documentation. My granddaughter, Lily, knocked at my door the next morning. She held up a drawing of our old home, captioned, "My favorite house." Tears pooled, but I smiled, storing the picture behind the ledger. We'd talk about it later, before her departure. She hugged me and whispered, "Grandma, when you get our house back, we'll have a picnic." Okay. My heart cracked. I didn't tell her everything, just kissed her forehead and said, "I promise." As she left, I turned back to the files. They weren't just papers. They were the past hand I'd played. Now ready to claim victory. I gathered everything into a folder labeled Evidence, Deposit Rights. Tomorrow, I would send a certified letter to Camilla and Jacob. I would ask for a meeting. I would request clarity and respect. I would offer a solution, either formalize my role or acknowledging my rights legally. It was not revenge. It was justice, and the law was on my side. I remember the day I made the call. It felt different from the others. Calm, deliberate, almost ceremony. I dialed the number of the attorney's office I had found on my meeting with Frank's recommendation. The receptionist answered kindly and scheduled me for an appointment 2 days later. After that, I knew how things would start to unfold. On the morning of our meeting, I wore a simple blouse and a pin my late husband had given me. It was the same pin I'd worn at the first key ceremony. An old silver flower, not flashy, just meaningful. I wanted to feel grounded. At the attorney's office, a woman named Miss Carter guided me in. She had a gentle voice, but spoke with precision. She reviewed the documents. The deposit receipts, the bank records, the loan contract clearly stating, co-owner of deposit with my name. She nodded slowly. We have a strong case. I sat forward, hands folded in my lap. I don't want confrontation. I want respect. I want my role acknowledged. She smiled. That's fair. We'll prepare a formal petition to declare you as landlord, the legal holder of rights on the property. Then you can enforce them, including the right to grant or deny access. My heart fluttered, not from fear, from readiness. The next morning, we dropped the petition at the county offices. We paid the filing fee. I watched the clerk stamp the papers. Filed. It sounded like a bell in the empty hallway. Inside, I felt lighter, not triumphant, just recognized. Later that week, I scheduled a locksmith visit to the property. The key I had once held for ceremonial reasons no longer mattered. I needed new steel forged for clarity. The locksmith came in the afternoon, a stern man who didn't ask questions. I handed him the address and watched as he worked. He finished quickly, fitting a heavy brass lock onto the front door. He tested it. You're set, he said, sliding the new key toward me. It was solid in my hand, but I didn't flush it. It would stay with me. He packaged the old key in a plastic bag. You sure you don't want both? He asked kindly. I shook my head. I only need one. That evening, I stood back while a board bearing the words, Landlord access restricted, only key holder may enter, was affixed beside the doorbell. The vinyl letters glinted in the setting sun, serious and unmistakable. I stepped away and then took a breath, looking at what I had done. No anger in my posture, only resolution. This was the politest exertion of authority I had ever taken. The house no longer belonged solely to them. It belonged legally, officially, in part, to me. More. It belonged under my protection, not just their enjoyment. That night, I slept well, for the first time in weeks. I did not worry. I did not fret about cameras or invitations. I trusted the law, and more, I trusted myself. I made plans the next day. A letter to Camilla and Jacob, explaining that from now on, any visit would need my permission. I drafted guidelines for visits. Time limited, respectful, supported by mutual understanding. I required notice. I offered to share coffee in exchange for conversation. It wasn't rejection. It was reciprocity. They would have to invite me, and they would have to mean it. Because I meant it. I meant to reclaim my place. Not as a guest, not as a relic, not as a burden, but as someone they should have never dismissed. Someone who trusted herself enough to stand up. And finally, someone who owned the locks. The phone rang just after breakfast, shattering the morning calm. It was my daughter-in-law's number flashing on the screen. I sat back in my kitchen chair, hands folded, and let it ring twice before I answered. Yes, Camilla. Her voice came sharp and frantic. What have you done? She demanded. Her tone had the tremor of panic. Are you insane? You can't just change the locks. I live there. I have rights. I took a deep breath. I'm sorry you feel upset, but legally, I am now the landlord. I followed the proper process. Petition filed. Locksmith came. Notice served. I spoke softly, deliberately. There was no room here for raising voices. Ink. She cut in near hysteria. You can't. You just can't. I'm calling the police. You'll be arrested for unlawful eviction. I closed my eyes. Let them come, I said quietly. But I suggest you read Section 8, Paragraph 3 of the Wisconsin Landlord-Tenant Act. I heard her gasp. You're the tenant now. You need permission to enter. Visits require my approval. 48-hour notice, 1 hour limit, $25.00 per visit. Her voice wavered. Fee, you're charging me. Yes, I said. Think of it as property management. I'm willing to negotiate terms. But first, I hold the key. She screamed. This is extortion, and hung up. Moments later, the doorbell rang. I walked to the window and saw 2 officers on my porch, Camilla pacing behind them. My son Jake stood behind her, eyes downcast, hands shaking loosely at his sides. The door opened, and the officer addressed me. We got a complaint. Ma'am, can I see your key? I nodded and inserted it. The bolt slid open with a satisfying click. They entered and examined the lock. The legal notices taped to the door. The locksmith's invoice. Their faces shifted from confusion to respect. The senior officer turned to Camilla. Lady? It's legal. The key holder sets access. She sank onto the couch, her face pale. My son whispered, Mom. I looked at him gently. Jake, I don't want to punish you. I want respect. I want recognition that I helped build this place. Emotionally, financially, morally. He looked at Camilla, who rubbed her temples. Silence filled the room. Officer placed a hand on her shoulder. If you want access, you contact her. Deliver the notice. Pay the fee. That's how landlord-tenant works. I glanced at the officer. Thank you. Eventually, they left. We were alone. I felt the weight in my chest ease, not because I had been victorious over them, but because the truth spoke for itself. Camilla stared at me. What do you want? I took a slow breath. I want to know that my presence matters. So, if you want me here, you'll plan, you'll notify, and you'll mean it. Her eyes glistened. She swallowed hard. Mom, I'm sorry. That came out wrong. I'm overwhelmed. I nodded. So, pay the fee. Then let's have tea together. She sank into a chair, tears in her voice. Okay. I walked to the kitchen and poured tea for us both in delicate mugs. My pattern. We ate scones I had baked that morning, the house smelling like cinnamon and warmth. I felt the old joy stirring as we talked. Not about locks, but about Lily's upcoming recital, Jake's new job, and the small joys we used to share here regularly. It felt like the first tremor of thaw after a long winter. Still, I didn't let the key leave my pocket again. I stayed calm, regal. I was the owner, the landlord, the grandmother again, but on my terms. Later that afternoon, I heard a quiet knock. One knock. Deliberate. I answered it, and there stood Lily, shy, holding a note. Grandma, can I see you? I smiled and nodded. She stepped in slowly, sat on the sofa next to me, and I wrapped an arm around her. What would you like to share? She whispered. I don't like it when you sit on the porch. I like it better when you sit here and talk. My eyes misted. I rubbed her hand. Me too, darling. When she left, I closed the door and drew my key from my pocket. I turned it in the lock, then slid it back. The house felt like home again, not because of bricks or walls, but because I had returned to a place where I was wanted by choice, not assumption, by evening. Camilla came back with a small envelope. She slipped it onto the table. Here,
she said, for tomorrow. I opened it to find $40. She said softly, 2 visits. I want to bake with you tomorrow morning. I looked up, teary-eyed. I would love that. Before she left, she hugged me. I let her. I didn't hold back. That night, before I went to bed, I held the keys close. They were still mine, not for revenge, not for power, but for peace, for choice, for the respect I deserved. They were theirs when they earned them. But from now on my terms, and that, finally, felt like home again. My hands trembled slightly as I picked up the brass key that hung on my key ring. I had carried it with me every day since the locksmith changed the lock. It was more than metal. It was affirmation, ownership, respect, recognition. It bore the weight of months of erasure and humiliation, but also the weight of victory, not revenge, but justice. That morning, I arrived at the doorstep of the house I helped build. I was early, the sun still low and soft across the lawn. The flowers I had once planted peeked through the soil, gentle reminders of past hopes and present possibilities. I took a breath and let the cool Wisconsin air fill me. I and this key had come for a reason. But more than that, I had come for myself. I inserted the key and entered. The door opened a fraction, then fully, inside. I found Camilla standing in the hallway, her face pale, exhaustion etched around her eyes. My son Jake hovered behind, shifting from one foot to the other. She looked hesitant, unsure how this visit would unfold, or if it would shatter like so many others had. I stepped inside quietly, closing the door behind me. I folded my coat and draped it over a chair in the foyer. No proud stance, just composed resolve. She swallowed and extended her hand. "Mom," she whispered, "I am sorry for everything." My heart lightened. It wasn't dramatic. No cameras catching tears. No music swelling with betrayal. It was simple. It was human. I nodded. "I appreciate that." "Camilla, I didn't come to tell you I'm taking over your home. I came to say thank you for inviting me back." She blinked. We realized we were wrong. You were never asking for anything but belonging." I met her gaze. "I never wanted the locks. I wanted your respect. You questioned that. So I asked the law to remind us all of the value of integrity." Camilla bit her lip. "That was bold." I smiled gently. Bold is just dignity with a spine. She laughed softly. Relief born of guilt. Perhaps. My son stepped in then. "Mom, please stay for breakfast." I nodded. "I'd like that." We moved into the kitchen. My hands brushed against the counter where I had talked to Lily about sewing, where I once helped sift pancake batter. The home felt different, but not bad. It welcomed me now, with understanding. Camilla set plates on the table. I placed a small vase of daisies, plucked from my garden that morning. In the center. "Remember these?" I asked. Gently. She touched them. "I do." Moments later, breakfast began. We spoke in small voices. I told them about the legal process, landlord rights, deposit contracts. They listened. They didn't argue. They listened. When Jake finished eating, he looked at me. "Mom, I'm sorry I didn't stand up sooner. I reached across the table and touched his hand.
You were doing the best you knew, and now you're learning how to do more. He nodded, eyes glistening. Camilla cleared her throat. So, are you going to charge us again?
I leaned back, laughed softly. I'd love a few more visits. Maybe bake some apple pie tonight. No charge. She let out a breath she'd been holding. Deal. At that moment, I realized something. This visit wasn't about winning back space. It was about mutual respect. Doors open because I chose to walk through them, not because I was allowed. A few weeks later, I sat on the porch of my cozy cottage in the town nearby. A house small, sweet, and all mine. A spare room for guests. A lavender bush by the door. A picket fence I built with my own hands. It was morning. Sunshine spilled across the hardwood floor. I stirred a cup of tea and tucked a note into my coat pocket. Welcome, Grandma. 10A. Tuesday. Knitting circle starts here. A group of local women, widows and retirees, had asked me to share sewing lessons. I love to teach, and I love the idea of building something new. I sold off my share of the old house. I retained legal interest, but formally released formal claim. I used the proceeds to buy a few small parcels, garden plots, a workshop, a spot for lectures. I hung a sign above my front window. Ruth's Sewing and Storytelling. Some mornings I sit at my desk, the jar of pens near a stack of hand-stitched garments and photograph albums. Every stitch I teach is threaded with history and hope. One afternoon, while I was teaching a group of 3 women to piece quilt blocks, my phone rang. It was Camilla's number. I excused myself, stepped onto the porch, and answered softly. Good afternoon. Camilla? She was hesitant. Hi, Aunt Ruth. I wanted to say thanks. The house has never felt more like home since you returned. Lily has asked me to bake every weekend. My heart warmed at that. I paused before replying. I'm glad it's working for you. She hesitated. Would you consider coming next weekend? She wants to cook pancakes with you. I looked over my garden. The breeze moved the leaves, and something soft inside me stirred. I smiled. Of course, I said. She paused, then said, Love you. I laughed, voice catching. Love you, too. I hung up. The quilt block I held slipped, warm in my hands. I walked back into the workshop as the women looked up. They'll be here next Sunday, I told them softly. They smiled. They believed in the home we fostered. That night, I sat on my porch, a warm mug in hand, the sunset staining the sky. I thought of the past year, the cold porch nights, the locked doors, the fear, the law, the key. I thought of the journey from burden to boss, and beyond that, to belonging again. I did not need their money. I did not need their approval. I needed respect, and I earned it. I looked at my hands. They were the same hands that sewed little dresses, planted gardens, balanced household budgets. They were the hands that held legal documents and taught respect for ownership, my own and others. I thought of the little cottage around me and knew I had built more than a house. I had built a life I chose, marked by generosity, defined by dignity, shaped by self-respect. And in the quiet dusk, I whispered to the wind, home is not given, it is claimed, with love and with grit. I raised my mug and toasted to the future. Not to what I lost, but to what I gained. I am Ruth Hamilton, grandmother, landlord, teacher, storyteller. And I no longer have to knock on anyone's door to belong. If this story made you feel something, if it reminded you of someone you know, or even someone you used to be, then I invite you to stay a little longer with me. These are not just stories. These are truths that lived in silence for too long. Stories from front porches and quiet kitchens, from nursing homes and backyards, from the soft-spoken women who remember everything, especially the things they were never supposed to say aloud. Here on Grandma True Stories, we speak what was once buried. We honor the strength behind the silence, the wisdom behind the wrinkles, and the justice that waits patiently for its time. So, if you believe that age does not make you invisible, if you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been told you've done enough, only to rise again, stronger, quieter, and wiser, then this channel is for you. Click subscribe to hear more real stories from women who didn't just survive. They remembered. And if you've got a story in your own bones, maybe one day we'll tell yours too. Because revenge has no expiration date. And when a grandma speaks, the world finally listens.